Hi guys, Togo here with a new video, and this video will be my, it's not really a tier list, but more like an indication on what class is the easiest to gear up in Classic WoW fresh Classic WoW, however you want to call it, the fresh server that is going to come out in a few days. And some people might choose a class based on how easy it is to gear, because you can choose a class because it is maybe super strong, or you're choosing a class because you want to do only PvP and you're choosing because of that, or you're choosing a class because you want to gear up quite efficiently and be like having a great spot in a raid and still be having a good time while gearing. And I'm thinking about like soft reses. I'm thinking about maybe in a guild that is actually playing around a loot console or whatever. Like there's a lot of factors coming in on how you can gear your character. You can gear your character through PvP, you can gear up your character through dungeons, or you can gear up your character through raids or quest items or whatnot. But I would say that every single class has a combination of everything, and some classes get some leather instead of plate, for example, warrior. Some classes get some cloth instead of like a plate healing gear, which is, for example, holy paladin, especially in classic WoW. And you have multiple classes that are overlapping gear where you have a huge amount of competition. Now I'm going to talk about every single class, and I'm going to talk about also some off meta specs which are not really that prominent in raiding, but I'm still going to talk about them, and I might replace it just whenever I'm talking for example, I'm talking about Retribution Paladin, I'm going to place it, and I'm going to talk about Holy Paladin and place it. So if you watch the whole tier list, or at least the whole video, you will understand where the placement of these specs are. So please watch the whole video. So let's talk about the tier list, or at least how I will place it. It's not really a tier list, like I said. It's a discussion on what is easy or hard. So we have hardest, hard, okay, easy, or easiest. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. I'm going to put one of the hardest, and I'm going to put one of the easiest, so you do understand how I scale the things. I think that's the easiest to talk about, I would say. I think again that's the class I have played in 2019. Extensively through also TBC and then also Wrath of the Lich King and Cataclysm still. But the spec or the class Druid, I played as a Resto Druid in raiding. I played also as a Balanced Druid in raiding. I even did a bit of Feral, and I have tasted a bit of everything in Vanilla. And then in TBC, I just became just a full-time Feral pretty much, and in Wrath of the Lich King as well. But easiest is the rating I would give to Druid. I think if you want to have a class that is super easy to gear, is not really that dependent on gear for PvP or PvE, to be fair. For PvP, you want to stack as much stamina as possible, pretty much, and depending on your spec, you can lean up a bit more into intellect or strength, for example. Not in vanilla, you want to get strength, not too much agility. You can have some agility, but strength is the one thing that will make you hit harder, at least in classic. And I do believe Druid is one of the easiest classes to play. I feel like, not play, but like gear up. A raid will always have at least 1 to 2 to maybe 3 druids, because you will feel like you're going to have a lot of druid gear that you cannot give, so you want to have at least like those spots to be taken, so you have not loot that is disenchanted from the get-go. You want to like gear up multiple ones, because you know maybe a druid will fall away once it's fully geared. Maybe he's fully geared MC and he doesn't care about MC anymore. But that's for like, let's say in a guild. But if you're like going into a soft res like raid, which I did often, I often raided with the guild as a hunter and went druid, resto druid at least, in soft res raiding. And then once I had like enough pieces, I wanted to go balance druid, for example. I then went with my guild, and they were accepting that because they really wanted to try with a Boomy. I would say for Resto Druid, excuse me, for Resto Druid, it is one of the easiest. For Feral Druid, it is pretty okay, I'm saying, because you are like in competition with rogues and even with warriors, but you don't need a weapon, and that's the harshest competition in my eyes towards like gearing with raids for warriors and rogues. As a druid, you don't really need that much of like a big piece to make up for your DPS. So that's pretty okay. And for Boomy, gearing wise, I would say that it is quite hard. But the good thing is you have some pieces that are not interesting for warlocks, not interesting for mages, not interesting for shadow priests even, and they could then land into your druid. So it's quite good. But I would say if you are looking into raiding and you are probably going to go Resto Druid, it is the easiest one to gear up. If it's dungeon gear or if it's like raiding gear, I feel like the previous for Druid and the Biz gear for Druid is one of the easiest to obtain. I was like one of the first ones in a guild to be fully stacked, I would say, gearing wise. And they were very happy that I'd stick around, at least with one of the characters, a hunter or a druid. And they were very happy whenever I did the transition to balance druid because they wanted me to go to balance druid, and I also wanted it. So we did the discussion. And it was actually quite good. So I do feel like druid is interesting to play if you are looking for a easy time to gear. And I would say one of the hardest ones to gear up, and that's genuinely because of competition, it is warrior, and that is truly because you're very dependent on your weapon. I think in general you're going to have huge competition on dungeon gear, huge competition on raiding gear. PvP gear is actually very good, but you still need to do rank. So if you are looking at for a rank 10, for example, which is pretty obtainable with current standards, depending on how much hours you're putting on the ranking side of things. You do get some good pieces, but you still want a lot of pieces from raiding, from dungeons, like even UBRS. And you have a lot of competition, except if you're like, for example, yourself organizing the dungeons or raids where you're going to hard res a few things. I still think that it is deserving the hardest spot. You need the weapons, which are like a competition, especially if you're dual wielding. Not dual wielding, but I mean dual weapon. So yeah, dual wielding. Excuse me, like my English is failing me today. So two weapons. So you could have a dagger that you would like, because again, offhand with dagger is quite good. And then you're in competition with dagger rogues, or you're going for swords, and then you're also in competition with swords rogues, but also with other warriors, especially alliance side. And then you could also say, look, I want to have a two-hander because I want to do PvP, but even then, you have a lot of warriors that are looking for doing some PvP. And if you're going to soft res a raiding, which is cool, the thing is you have like two soft res often, and then a lot of people are like putting on the weapons because once the weapon is dropping, that's their time to shine, and a lot of people are going to do that, or at least the same, and that kind of ruins your chances to get a said weapon. So for example, Bond Reaver's Edge, if you want to go for that, that's cool, but you know there is a lot of competition for that. But it's also one of the satisfying classes to gear up. So once it's geared up, it's actually quite interesting to do well with it. I will also say like consumes wise, I would say also quite like enchants wise, or like even Lionheart's Helm is super expensive. So again, that's also a factor that I do say that, look, this is the hardest class to gear up. Now I would say again, from a perspective from playing Hunter, is that it is also the easiest to gear up. I could say like easiest. Does it like deserve only one class in it? That's another discussion. I might change it at the end. But I do feel like also for warrior tanking, it might be then easier. So if you're main tanking, again, I'm gonna change it. If you're main tanking as a warrior, it is the easiest because you're going to get funneled a lot of gear. If you're DPS, it is hardest. So I guess there is like a contrast with that. But if you're main tanking for your raid, normally a lot of the gear is going to be funneled to you, so that's an easier time to get gear. But that's it. Like again, there is nuance. So there is a difference between main tanking, and there is a difference with off tanking, and there is also a difference with DPS. But that, I think you can also put it for yourself. Like how important is your role into the raid, and at that point you can then decide like, okay, that's why I'm going to get more pieces in your load console. In software's raiding, for example, doesn't really matter, but the competition for those pieces are still very high. Hunter, I would say that generally speaking, you have I don't know, 3 hunters, maybe 4 hunters per raid, because it is like at least like an amount of DPS that is kind of guaranteed. And there's a lot of pieces that are going to drop for hunters that you don't want to get wasted. Same for druid. And a lot of hunters are actually like dropping off while raiding because they get fully geared, and they then don't bother like raiding at that point. For example, in soft res raids, or in your load console raids, or whatever loot system you're going for in your guild. I think hunters are like one of the ones that are like the least amount of I would say pieces that are like wasted in competition, but also I feel like you do scale very well, at least in the first few phases, but you're not really dependent as much on gearing than, let's say, a warrior. So your dungeon gear, your raiding gear, even your PvP gearing is quite easy to get, because often you don't have that many hunters in a raid compared to the amount of warriors that are in the raid. Also, your tier 1 is so good. Your tier 2 is also so good. Your tier 3 is also so good. So you have your tier pieces being very, very valuable for you, while as a like as a DPS warrior, you don't have that luxury. So you're going to have to fight on those pieces that are not based on tier, which are like more rare to drop in my eyes. So again, the easiest, could say easy, because then you have like a competition with druid for the easiest, like the, depending if you want to put just only one class in that bracket. But I do feel like hunter is deserving this. And then we're going to talk about paladin, or I would say healers in general. You have holy paladin, and you have your priest, and then you have also your shaman. And I would say that I want to talk about shaman first. I do believe that it is a easy class to gear up if you're going to go for resto shaman, because a lot of the gear is going to be funneled to you. They want you to still raid in the guild, because basically every guild is going to look for a shaman, or like at least 8 shamans to raid with, because of the totems, and just in general the utility that it has, and also the healing that it produces with chain heals. Very, very good. I do feel like you get a lot of gear. There is competition, because again, there are at least 8 shamans, and that itself is competition. But then again, you could have also an elemental shaman in the group. You can in that raid. You could also have an enhancement shaman in that raid, and those guys are going to have a lot less gear than you, the resto shaman. Now, if you're like thinking about enhancement shaman, for example, I think it's quite hard to get a gear, even hardest probably, because you're like in a lot of competition with warriors, especially if you're going for 2-handers, for example. And I would say they are not going to get funneled gear at all. So that it might be a problem for you. Also, the tier is not. I don't know if the tier is good or not. I don't remember the whole WISHLIST for like enhancement shaman, but I do feel like it's quite hard. And the same for elemental shaman. You're going to have to like get cloth, which is pretty much like the territory for warlocks, your priests, and your mages. But also, if you're going for healing gear, then you're also in competition with disc priest or holy priest, and that is also something. But I would say that it is like elemental shaman quite hard with enhanced shaman, and I would say the healing, so resto shaman, is going to be in the easy part. But you still have some competition, but you have so many like plus healing spells gear that is going to be dropping, that is going to help you with getting gear pretty fast. And everyone wants to satisfy shamans, at least in vanilla and TBC as well. So it's going to be a good thing. I'm for sure talking mostly about MC and BWL. The later phases, again, if you picked a class based on gear for next Ramas, I think it's quite late. So prefer to talk about the early phases, so you are actually going to decide if you want to play a class that is easy to gear or not. I think once you're in next Ramas, gear is a thing, but you have already your guild, you have your loot console, maybe your soft reses or whatever, and that is going to be a more easy to have an oversight on what classes is easy or hard to gear up. I would say that priest is also quite easy, at least the healing one. Why is it not easiest? Because you're in competition with Holy Paladin. You're either in competition with Holy Paladin or Resto Shaman, and you're also in competition with Resto Druid, but Resto Druid has at least a lot less of them in the raid, while Priest has a lot of them, so you are going to also have to fight for tier pieces, and often Priest is also going to heal in raids instead of doing damage. You only have maybe, if they're very lucky, one Shadow Priest in your raid. Again, that's in the optimal sense. If you're like not playing in an optimal raid, who cares? It is what it is. It doesn't matter. Then gear is going to be depending on like how the loot console is or the soft reses are or whatever. But I do feel like if you're thinking about priest in dungeons, it's quite easy to get gear. I think also in your raiding groups is going to get quite like a lot of gear. If you're a shadow priest, you could also just like gear up through PvP. That's also an option. It's not fantastic, but it is something at least. You could also probably get gear in dungeons or with like BOEs. That's also a possible outcome. But I would say that if you're like thinking to play Shadow Priest in a raid, you're going to be in competition with Warlocks, but also with just like general cloth gear. So it is going to be a hard class to gear up. Maybe hardest if you are going to be in a guild that is like prioritizing mages and warlocks over you, which is a possibility at the end. So for me, it's going to be easy. I would say that Paladin is also in the easy category. It is not the easiest because you have a lot of Paladins in your raid, at least 8 of them. Not at least 8 of them, but you want to like have all the benedictions. So all the buffs at least. I think it's at least 5. You want to have at least 5 if you want to be efficient. But again, you have such a difficult time to get like everyone or at least the perfect comp. You don't want to have the perfect comp. Again, I think you don't need to have 25 warriors, but if you want to have all the buffs, it's ideal to have like at least 5 of them. So yeah, but I still think there is competition for cloth gear, there's competition with your own tier pieces, and again, I think it's not the easiest, it's also not the hardest because you want to gear up your healing specs so they get like still motivated to come heal a raid. But if you're thinking about Retribution Paladin, I think it is one of the hardest, if not like the hardest or hard. Like the same for Enhancement Shaman, they don't really get funneled gear, and you only go for two-handers, which are generally seen as PvP weapons. So everyone can roll pretty much. And if you're thinking about like loot consoles, it's very hard to funnel gear into a Retribution Paladin because you know the DPS is not going to be drastically higher than without a weapon. And if you want to progress a bit faster, you want to gear up the ones that are going to be contributing DPS a bit more. But again, some guilds can be a bit more lenient and like put the gear on the people that do deserve because of their time spent in the guild, for example, or in the raids. But that's or with DKP, maybe you can buy it yourself. But again, depending on loot console, depending on soft res or whatever, you could maybe find it. But I do feel like it's hard to get a spot as a Retribution Paladin, so that itself is actually very hard. But anyways, I would say it's easy in general. If I'm thinking about Mage and Warlock, I do feel like they are both in the okay spot. Because it is not necessarily easy, because you have competition between them, you have competition between all the clothies, also for the weapons, but you don't scale as hard, I would say, depending on gear. Like warriors scale way harder, and rogues as well, if their gear is like optimal. Mages and warlocks, they do scale with the time, also with like how gear is evolving between the phases. But I would say MC gear is still very important for mages and warlocks because of, again, more gear means more DPS. But I would say it's not as drastic as a warrior or rogue, and that's why you want to stack up warriors and rogues. Excuse me, especially warriors, not really rogues, but you can also stack some rogues because they do very good DPS because of the amount of pieces you're going to put on them. But I would say mage and warlock, they have an easier time because all the spell power gear is going to go for them. Like in general, like mage and warlock get like the spell power gear. You have a lot of mages and warlocks, but not as many as warriors in general. Like if you're thinking about like a soft res run, generally speaking, you will see a lot more warriors and rogues than mages and warlocks because it is also not the most popular specs classes in the game compared to them. So I would say the OK spot is quite deserving. Again, I didn't play mage in vanilla raiding, and I didn't really play I did play a bit of warlock, but not like raiding very hard. So I don't really feel if I am like 100% correct. So if you think it's very hard, please let me know in the comment section below. And I would say rogues, they deserve the hard spot, not the hardest, because again, you have multiple ways you can go. You can go sword rogue or you can go dagger rogue. So there is competition within rogue class, but you could also say, look, we have 5 rogues. You two, you go dagger, or you two, you go sword, and then we'll see from there. And I would say you could also gear up through PvP. You could also gear up through dungeon. You have a lot of good gear through dungeon. And also the 0.5 set is like, again, costs a lot of money, but it's also one of the best sets in the game. So that itself is a possibility to gear up yourself without like having too much competition. You still have competition, but not as much as like, for example, warriors have. And I do feel like it's not as punishing as warrior, but also it's very satisfying. Once you have gear, it feels like you're going to do way more DPS, but also do very well in PvP. And this kind of goes for like everything, PvE, PvP, leveling, whatever. Like this feels really real. Like those classes, like Druid and Hunter, are like the least dependent gear classes that towards gear. Like if you have like no gear Druid versus no gear Warrior, just in general, you will feel like the power levels are very close, especially Feral, for example. But the more gear you put in Warrior or the more gear to Druid, you will see the differences like be way bigger for Warrior being very high compared to Druid. That's why they do scale very well, even with world buffs, while Druid's a bit less, for example. And Hunter the same, like they do scale well, but not to the point of warriors getting like literally 3 pieces. A 3 pieces warrior and compared to a 3 pieces hunter is like, it's really big. The difference is really big. So again, thank you for watching this video. Really appreciate you. Hopefully you managed to be in line with what I'm saying. But obviously if you're like not agreeing with me, that's all right. We could also discuss it in the comment section below. This is my opinion. Again, it's not like science. It could be that this fresh will be the other way around. Warriors are going to be like with no competition because everyone would roll everything else. But I truly believe Warrior is still going to be the most played class in the game because main tanks, off tanking, DPS, you always want a warrior. Although the competition is very high, you still want to have warriors in your raid. No matter how many, the more you have, the better. But obviously, for example, if I would make a guild, I would take some meme classes if they are very committed and they do consumes, for example, and they participate in every raid and they are very active and they very much help. I would take gladly a Retribution Paladin with me, or Enhancement Shaman with me, or I don't know if Balance Druid with me, because I know that they're putting efforts to be participating into those raids, and I would even like reward them with gear because I think time should be rewarded with gear for every single class or person that is actually putting a lot of efforts into the raids, into the guild and whatnot. So I think it's all matter of perspective, a matter of finding the right guild, finding the right mates, maybe organizing yourself those soft res gears raids, so you could actually like soft res your own pieces that you would like to have. And yeah, I think it's a great way to play the game. So again, thank you for watching. Have a great day.